Usually I hear a little ding when we go live. There's no ding. Did you hear a ding?
I did not hear a ding.
No ding, but we got the little golden live button. So welcome to the Noahide Nexus. I am James, and this is a weekly Torah study discussion for all folks on Google Plus and beyond who are interested in taking the time to discuss the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. The 5 books are broken down into weekly readings, and we go over them every Thursday, for pretty much every Thursday, right here on Google Plus. Thursday nights, 8 p.m. Central Time, Central North American Time. We begin this week with Vayikra. This is Leviticus to the Western world. This is where a lot of questions are answered. We're going to get to a few questions. We all love talking about sin and offerings and the blood and all that good stuff. And we're going to get a pretty concise look at exactly what goes on with these. Tonight, we're also going to be talking about, since Leviticus, it's named after the Levites, the priests, an entire nation of priests within the nation of priests, tribe, if you will. Sons of Levi. And what does it mean to be a priest? Because we can say, sure, what's one who does this, but how does it work for Gerim? I've often thought about changing the name of this because the Noahide Nexus is really catchy, and my friend John came up with that. John G. It changes once in a while, but old J Dubs came up with a name, and I've thought about making it like the Ger Nexus, because the more I read, the more I find and get Ger, and by getting Ger means it's an ongoing process. It means the ball's rolling, destination, the path might be a different story. But just a plug, if you want a great read, I would suggest, along with other things that you should already be reading if you're a Noahide or interested, it'd be a Chumash. The 5 books of Moses. Need to get a study Bible, Service of the Heart, Service from the Heart, or a prayer book, the Divine Code, and World of the Ger. This is by Rabbis Chaim Chlorfine and David Katz. It is called the World of the Ger. It's available on gergear.com. You can also find it on Amazon. Get this book. It is wonderful. And it's easy reading. It's so easy, even I understood it. It's that simple. He's that real that even I was able to grasp it. So if I can get it, you can get it. And just to let you know, anything that comes out of my mouth tonight, I want to let you know I know nothing. Always consult your local rabbi. I should put that disclaimer as part of I forget sometimes. Always consult your local rabbi. I know nothing. Maybe together we might be able to find something. Okay. Ross is here. How you doing, Ross? How's your evening?
I'm fine. Good to be here tonight again. And if you're going to change the name, maybe the Ger Gathering.
The Ger Gathering. Ooh, I like that. The Ger Gathering.
It might work.
It might work. We'll see. It's pretty catchy. The Noahide Nexus, very catchy title, isn't it? It's it rolls off the tongue. Nexus is such a cool word. Kind of a nerdy word, I guess. Parsha. Let's do Parsha. Let's talk Torah. It is Torah time. And by the way, it's also I just wanted to ask you if you wore green today to ward off any evil Catholics. I've pinched at work a couple times today. It's also St. Patty's Day today for posterity. Did you get pinched?
No, I totally spaced it. It was that day, St. Patty's Day.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I got caught at work. Like, hey. Oh, yes. On St. Patrick's Day, one wears green, and that wards off evil Catholics with their pinchies. I'm just kidding. I married a Catholic. Okay. So I know darn well they're evil. Oh bad joke.
No, I married one too.
Ow! They get you. Okay. Leviticus, I've often heard, we've said this about parts of Exodus back here, but there's so little drama in Vayikra, in Leviticus. There's so there's we don't get a necessarily a Sinai event or all that leads to it, the anticipation. Leviticus doesn't have a lot of strife and struggle and near as much as I think the other books, and people often find it dry. But when Leviticus is the first book that normally Jewish parents teach their children. You would think it'd be Genesis to start at page 1, but Genesis, Shalom, Pam.
Shalom.
Shalom, Pam.
Shalom, Ross.
So as I was telling about how we don't actually begin children on Genesis. Genesis actually is quite a complicated and mind-blowing, boggling book, and there's so much, I think, deeper, far more questions come out of it than could ever be put into it. But Leviticus is very straightforward, isn't it? It's a good place to start.
It is. I think that's why they start teaching the children at Leviticus. It kind of gets them grounded in the purpose and things, and then they can teach them the deeper understandings of stuff as they're older.
I've always kind of felt like this is the part that during those 40 days and 40 nights while he was up there getting 10, this is the rest of the story. If you know what I mean.
Part of the rest of the story, yeah. I think they overlap somehow because, in Numbers they're taking counts and numbers and stuff.
Yeah, if you're looking for chronology in Torah, you have to keep studying it.
Absolutely.
It's more complicated when it comes to chronology than Doctor Who. You really have to, and I'm still learning it. I'm just now getting when Jethro arrived. How long has it been? We've been doing that, I think, lately. This go around, we've been much more conscious about the order of events as we're given in the Torah.
Thanking God for Ross. He didn't connect a few dots, I wouldn't have got it yet. And I've been studying for years.
It's just that's what helped me to do it, was because I kept looking for these little time stamps, and I wondered, what is so important about the first month, second year, after it came out? And then I noticed, well, okay, if there's a first month, second year, then maybe it's trying to say something. And then I looked for another time stamp, and lo and behold, Jethro, second month, second year. Then that spawned a whole bunch of questions, and we covered that last week.
The Passover that you attend when you were unable to attend the actual Pesach. That was wild hearing that. And when it was, and that it was when Jethro comes back is when it's mentioned. It's called getting geared up right there. Some people get geared up.
Yeah.
Geared up.
Gearing right along.
Gearing right along. Shifting gears.
I like that. Shifting gears.
Okay. Well, I think this is a fun one here. A fun one. This is a fun one for Noahides. This first Parsha. When I say Noahide, I'm not necessarily saying the Gers, because the Noahide is one who's usually a little fresher, a little greener off the idolatry vine.
True.
Would be. And there's all kinds of it's all about the blood and the offerings and the sin offering, and we all know the story that we were taught as youngsters, most of us.
And this is where we find Hashem's opinion.
Yes. which matters.
Yeah.
In spite of what any rabbi or priest or anybody might say, we always have what God says.
Well, that's important because you can't claim to have done a perfect quote unquote sacrifice if you didn't do it the way God said to do it. Right?
Yeah, and if you notice, Hashem is very concise. He's very concise about this. It's just as concise as the details he gives for the garments and the tabernacle itself. He's very concise. And I know that some people are going to want to throw things in there to make it work because this is what we've been taught as children. You know, it just kind of sticks with you. I like a word in here. In the very first, it's the first thing is basically general rules. I'm reading, by the way, from the Stone Edition Chumash. I do have my Tanakh handy and my Sansino open. Now, Pam can get through that Sansino pretty darn quick. Mm-hmm. Hi, Larry, if you're there, by the way.
Hello.
Ah.
Yeah, Larry. Hello, Larry.
Hiding silently in the background.
He didn't have much of a choice, does he?
He does. He does. He just chooses not to be in the forefront. Trust me, when he's ready to say something, he flies up to the side.
There's a word in the general rules of offerings that just stood out, and I loved it. This is in the first. We're in Leviticus. We're in Vayikra 1:1 through verse 9, all the way through verse 9. And where's that word? Here we go. It doesn't say you shall. It says when a man among you brings an offering to Hashem. Very specific. When a man, not a man from among you, not when you. It's when a man. So apparently, women are not expected to bring offerings necessarily? Mm-hmm. Or does it mean an individual? But it's very vague. I don't think that...
In the Sansino, page 410, it says any man, Hebrew, Adam, even a heathen may bring an offering if he's moved to do so. So it's talking about mankind, not female, male.
We'll learn later that there are offerings that women can bring that men cannot.
Right.
Okay, the word I'm getting to, I'm just going to read up to it. I'll just read all the way through so we all know where we're at. If you're following along at home, once again, Leviticus 1:1. He called to Moses, and Hashem spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, When a man among you brings an offering to Hashem from animals, from the cattle or from the flock, you shall bring your offering. We'll get to that. Okay, I want to repeat it. I want to. If one's offering is an elevation offering from the cattle, he shall offer an unblemished male. He shall bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting voluntarily before Hashem. I'm going to stop right there because there's the V word, and I really love the V word. I think it's a great philosophy, especially when voluntarily.
Absolutely.
Voluntarily. That's one of the most misunderstood, unlike I think any other religion. It's not the same way. And people often look at us and think that when we're talking about offerings, just in general, that you're commanded to shed blood. The only way is to shed blood. One thing, boom, voluntarily, and back here, this is really great. This is really great. If one's offering is an elevation offering, okay. When a man among you brings an offering to Hashem from animals, that's from when you brings an offering to Hashem, from animals, from the cattle or from the flock, shall you bring your offering. From the cattle or from the flock, shall you bring your offering. What I want to know is, this is what God's telling you to do. And God has to separate. The whole point of this whole thing is to separate this nation from the world, and be distinct in doing so. And I'm thinking to myself, when we have these Canaanite religions like Moloch and things of that nature, are they saying that people are cattle or flock? You know what I'm saying? When you offer your own children, when they offer virgin sacrifices and all that jazz, it's like, where's Adam in this? Well, is Adam just really, were they just really confused? Is that how they view themselves? I don't know. That just jumped out at me.
I think it says a lot about their so-called gods and what their so-called gods require. Our God doesn't require human life. As a matter of fact, he finds it detestable. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And that shows he's merciful, and he doesn't want to see us destroyed. He wants to see us thrive. He wouldn't dream of us giving up our children as a sacrifice.
But kind of would go back to Abraham and Isaac. And yes, they were sacrificing human life.
Mm-hmm.
These other gods. So he's, in a way, this is saying you are much more than just a mere animal. And if you're willing to sacrifice another human being, then your valuation of humans is no different than that of an animal. And if you're willing to treat your fellow man like an animal, or consider him in your own mind no different than an animal, what type of society would you have?
Absolutely. So God is teaching us to be civilized.
Don't buy.
And what's the first thing people did to the Indians and stuff? Well, you're heathens. We got to civilize you. Well, God did civilization long before that.
And a good deal of the Indians caught on to that too.
Oh, yeah.
Did not believe it, but yeah.
Oh, yeah. Not all of them did human sacrifice.
No. I think the only ones we can find on North America were, the Pueblo?
No, there was over around the, where is it, Larry? There's some in Oklahoma that did.
What's that?
The Indians that sacrificed humans.
Shame on them.
They were There were, but there were also many that didn't. I was trying to think of the ones that did that were in Oklahoma. The mounds. The ones that build the mounds.
Well, that wasn't.
I'll have to look it up.
No, I'm not sure that they did it. Human sacrifice.
I know one of the museums around here showed it. So I don't remember which one it was. It was not Cherokee.
No.
It wasn't any of the civilized tribes that I'm aware of. Some of the non-civilized ones, that's why they weren't civilized.
Like every family has one,
Yep. Every family probably has one they'd willingly give up.
Probably.
I should shut up. That's not nice.
Well, if we could maybe we could talk to God about another city with some really tough Levites.
Mm-hmm. But there was a type of an offering that was acceptable to God when the firstborn was dedicated to his priesthood. That's a type of an offering. But they didn't die. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, Larry said they had to be redeemed too sometimes. So, anyway.
Every firstborn male child
had to be redeemed.
Was redeemed.
Yep.
Everyone.
Here's something else. When you look at offerings and the difference and what an offering truly means, you want to offer, and I know it's not this way, and I'm speaking very anthropomorphically and very figuratively, but you're offering God a meal in many ways. You don't offer God something you don't yourself eat, as far as an elevated offering or you don't. We're not going to offer lobster and cat. It just doesn't. Um,
It's not appropriate.
it's the same. What we give God is the same thing that we give ourselves. We're prohibited from eating flesh, consuming flesh, from a living animal.
Right.
You cannot offer the same thing to God. If you were to offer a person to God, there's no murder. You're already prohibited against murder and personal injury.
Yeah.
Therefore, how would you accept your person if someone was to offer you into your service, or you want them live and healthy and happy and educated, and so offering is and it's people say sacrifice. I never like the sacrifice word, and I say it and it comes out of my mouth and I can't get rid of it. I've tried. I have to live with it, but really it's an offering. You're offering something to God.
It really is an offering, absolutely. I mean, he says in the Hebrew, it doesn't say sacrifice, does it? It says offering. And any man who brings an offering,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what it said literally, is offering, not sacrifice. And people forget the meanings of the words. And they start interpreting the words. I like it when Rabbi Katz does that. Got to know the word. It says here in my footnotes, it says an offering an offering is a voluntary sacrifice, as distinct from the obligatory sacrifice later to be described. The individual is left free, according to the occasion or according to his feelings, to decide the kind of prescribed sacrifice he wishes to bring. The Hebrew word korban denotes that which is brought near to God by presentation upon the altar. But alongside of this literal meaning, it likewise implies that the offering, if brought in the right spirit, is the medium whereby man attains to closer nearest to the divine. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
I love the Sunsino.
When to me, and it starts out voluntarily, but you don't have to have a reason other than, God, I'd like you to have this.
Yeah. You're just thinking about God, and you want to draw close to God, and you're thankful and grateful because you woke up breathing. It's just Happy Tuesday, God.
Yeah.
Of course, I wouldn't call it Tuesday. Isn't that named after a god or something? Happy second day.
The third day. Right.
Well, interesting in this first sentence, it's called an elevation offering.
Yes, I was go for it. Yeah. Shut up. Go ahead.
Well, to me, that's saying that I feel good about my relationship with Hashem. He's blessed me. He continues to bless me. I recognize this relationship, and I cherish this relationship. And so it's the elevation of your spirit, the lifting of your spirit. This is just a way of saying thank you for the joy, the happiness, the goodness, the blessings in my life. That's the way I kind of interpret it.
Absolutely. It would definitely elevate you. I mean, when we give something of ourselves for the sake of heaven, not because we have to or for any other, but because we want to. Even today, without doing an animal thing, it's still something of ours, whether it's money, time, something. You know what I'm saying? But when we dedicate it to the service of God and we somehow give that over, doesn't it elevate us some?
Well, sure. I'll give you a perfect case in point. When Gare clicked for me, Gare clicked, and I'm reading this Parsha some time ago, a couple of years back, and I'm seeing any man. And as you go on through this Parsha, you start to understand that this means any man, any person.
Any human
Jew.
being.
Right. And I'm like, wow, that includes Gare. That's me.
Absolutely.
Okay, so boom, I'm elevated. I'm like hitting the high spots. I'm dancing on the mountaintops. That's me, that's me, that's me. Give me a bull. I want to go make a free will offering right now. Thank you, Hashem, for accepting me.
Amen.
That's why that's why it came to mean that to me. You've just lifted my spirits beyond anything I could have imagined. You know who I am, and pow, please accept this free will offering in appreciation of the fact that you love me.
Absolutely.
One of the things I got from the very first offering I mentioned, one is that it says when a man, and then in reading the Divine Codes, the English translation of the Sefer Sheva Mitzvot Hashem, the Book of the Seven Divine Commandments, it says that a Noahide may only bring, or B'nai Noach may only bring an elevated offering. Up until now, that's the only kind of offering one could make, if I'm not mistaken. That would be Adam's, Cain, Noach, Shem, all made this. This was the offering for all men, for all man.
And the burnt offering.
And it has to be completely consumed. You skin it. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I've got to get Larry to come get my dog. Hang on a minute.
Yeah, it has to be skinned and burned whole, the whole thing. And then we're going to get, but at this point, is that it's an elevated offering, and Ross really hit the nail on the head when it was that this is what it's all about. This is the general lesson for all mankind when making an offering to God, that it is for the sake of and for elevation, period. Yeah.
Larry asks, what were the offerings of Cain and Abel?
Well, flock. I would have to say probably goats or sheep.
Well, one was from a flock and the other one was from a garden, wasn't it? Wasn't one from a grain offering or something?
Yes.
Abel brought from the flocks, Cain brought from the ground, but he didn't bring the best. He just picked up whatever he could out of the garden, so to speak.
Right.
And basically says, here's my offering.
But this is talking about the burnt offering, not a vegetable offering.
Right. And if you go back to Jethro's offering, he made two. One was an elevation offering, and the other was a peace offering.
It's interesting, the note here says, where it mentions herd or flock, it's talking about domestic animals only are to be used, as these alone represent a real sacrifice to him who offers any of them. Wild animals, wild animals which cost nothing, are excluded, and the bringing of a stolen animal constituted a desecration.
Oh, yeah, they just catch all that. I had to bring.
And it says, clean and domesticated animals, furthermore, neither prey on other creatures, nor live by killing. Even as the use of iron was forbidden in the construction of the sanctuary because it was symbolic of the sword, so every animal that was associated with uncleanness or violence might not be offered on the altar. That's significant.
You could say you are what you eat.
True that, but it's not only what you eat, but remember, the priests are eating from, well, not from the burnt offering. Nobody eats the burnt offering.
Right. But the next one mentioned is the meal offering.
Yeah. And we're feeding the priest with some of these offerings, and so you are what you eat, so you don't feed the priest junk.
Not predator, not prey.
Right.
That's why you don't have rabbit and wolf and eagle.
And lion?
No lion. No.
No lions or tigers or bears.
Oh my. I had it to do. It goes on to say here in the Sansino that the burnt offering embodies the idea of the submission of the worshiper to the will of God in its most perfect form, as the entire animal was placed upon the altar to be burnt. Want me to finish reading it?
Sure. Absolutely.
Well, if I get too reedy or something, just tell me and I'll shut up.
Okay.
It says the Hebrew name for burnt offering is olah, signifies that which ascends, symbolizing the ascent of the soul in worship. By making the offering ascend to heaven, the one who offers it expresses his desire and intention to ascend himself to heaven, i.e., to devote himself entirely to God and place his life in God's service. Thus, the sacrifice of Yitro and the seven, and oh my gosh, standing at Sinai when Moses reads in the hearing of all the people and they do the sacrificing, that was a burnt offering, was it not?
I would have to say yes.
And then they had a meal. So they had a burnt offering and then a meal offering. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that would be the feast or peace offering. Was the other meal, yes.
Wow. Okay.
Now look how it progresses so far, and this has just hit me. So as we go through, I'm gonna be flipping one page at a time through the Parsha. We've come up. First, it says when a man. That's any man. Is that ish or is that just say Adam?
It says Adam.
Is Adam? Okay. When a man among you brings an offering, that means even a heathen. Okay. Now we get to the meal offering, which is in chapter 2. Now we've gone beyond this. Now we're entering into new territory. Mankind, or the descendants of Noah, those who gather the tents of Shem, descendants of Abraham. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
We got something new here, and it starts off by saying when a person. I looked down here in my notes in the Stone Edition Chumash. It says a person, literally a soul.
Yeah, Adam. It says
Nefesh.
men, Adam.
Nefesh.
It says, of all who bring voluntary offerings, only someone who brings a meal offering is described as a soul. Since this very inexpensive offering would be brought only by poor people, God said, I will regard it as if he had offered his very soul. That's Rashi. And it just flashes back to what Rabbi Katz, he was, sometimes what are the ger? They're the poor.
Uh-huh.
No, we're just poor, but
Can I make one more? Can I read one more little bit before we go on from the burnt?
did I interrupt you?
No, you didn't. But there's one more thing that I just found that I think is significant and needs to be brought out.
Please.
It says whatever its derivation, the burnt offering is the oldest and commonest form of sacrifice for the community and individual, and it remained the chief spontaneous offering of an individual. It was brought whenever a man's conscience prompted him to do so from a feeling of estrangement from God, in expiation of evil thoughts or unwitting sins. It was open to all men, even heathens from foreign countries. It says it was most striking from the Israelites' communion with God, but since communion with the Most High was impossible to anybody who was tainted with sin, your iniquity, as it says in Isaiah, it says, your iniquities have separated between you and your God. And since no man could be sure of being sinless, the rite of the burnt offering first had an expiatory effect before the worshipper's yearning for fellowship with God would be fulfilled. So that's why they do it in that, first the burnt offering, then the peace offering. The burnt offering was the coming close, I'm sorry, God, I want to be yours, forgive me for my sins kind of thing.
The Baal Tshuva.
Well, yeah, tshuva. That was the sign that they had turned. Okay, now you can go on. I'm sorry. I just thought that was significant because...
I want Ross to explain to us Baal Tshuva.
Okay. Like she was saying in the commentary, one who was estranged, walked away, fell away, drifted away, whatever, then wakes up one day and says, I've got to go back. He brings his offering, the sign of return, repent. I'm repenting from my error and turning back. Tshuva, doing tshuva, coming back to you, Hashem. And here, this offering that I'm giving you shows my sincerity.
It's like knocking on the door and saying, I'm home.
Now, there's also teshuva, right, as well. Teshuva? No?
Teshuva.
Okay.
That's what Ross was saying, was teshuva. You're returning home.
Oh, and that's why okay.
It's like knocking on God's door and saying, hi, I'm back.
Okay.
It's all related, yeah.
In Hebrew, it's teshuva.
Bing, bong, bong, bong.
Sorry, I have to shut my email down.
Not a problem. So a meal offering is you're feeding the priests. That's how they survive. That's how they live, is by the meal offering. They don't make a living. God doesn't pay them so many shekels a week.
They don't inherit the land.
Yeah, they have no land to inherit. Their children will be priests as well. So this is how they make a living. And Leviticus, I just wanted to point out, Vayikra is about the priesthood, but it's first about how to be a nation of priests, and then it becomes very specific in the priesthood itself later on. It gets a little more, if you will, I don't know if this is the right word, intense. It gets a little more specific. You get down to the priest, the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. Right now, this is how a nation of priests, as themselves, just the nation, let alone the priest's priest, or the priest's priest. Say that 5 times fast. And this is how they eat. They've got matzah. You bring good bread, which is flour and it's flour and finely ground. Here it is, wheat flour, oil and frankincense with water added in most cases. There's the flour offering. There's the oven-baked offering, a pan-baked offering. You can deep fry it. Fine flour offering. You can bring flour. You can atone with flour. With flour. Anybody that tells you that God needs blood or that you need to shed blood needs to go back and read Leviticus. Easy reading, very concise. God's straightforward. He is not messing around. God will not mess you over, I promise.
Absolutely not. The thing is God knows what is pleasing to him, and we can't force something else on him because we think it should be pleasing. He tells us what the perfect sacrifice is. And if we don't do what he says, then we're not sacrificing to him. We're sacrificing to our own self. You know what I'm saying? It's a form of idolatry to do things that God doesn't say just because we think it's pretty. You know, that's like the ones who got who ended up on the wrong side of God because they were doing something that God didn't order.
Yeah. Sometimes it was innocent, as we'll be seeing here shortly in Leviticus. I believe Aaron's sons happened here in Leviticus, correct?
Before you
Don't
go
make
to
me
that,
lie to you.
I think so. We'll understand about how we can see, many commentators will see something that was probably done with good intentions, but was so off the mark that, as Pam said, they ended up on the wrong side of the Lord.
It was considered strange worship because God did not order it. It's something that God didn't say, this is what pleases me. I think it's, Leviticus. I think we get into that. I'm trying to flip through back here and see about how far back it is.
before you get right up there, I just want to catch one little point that you just mentioned, that these priests have no inheritance in the land, no land to work,
Right?
to farm. They're dependent on the tithing, the offerings, the things that are brought in. And that's exactly the same position. Not just the Kohanim and the Levites, but here in the widow. Somebody just joined us.
No. I don't know why that. Okay, I'm muting me.
Okay. Path of Abraham. Shalom, shalom. Glad to have you here, sir. Now, something I was not familiar with, I never picked up on, I wanted to read. And this is right from the Torah. This is Vayikra chapter 2, verse 14 or 13. You shall salt your every meal offering with salt. You may not discontinue the salt of your God's covenant from upon your meal offering. On your every offering you shall offer salt. When you bring a meal offering of the first grain to Hashem, from ripe ears perched over fire, ground from plump kernels, shall you offer the meal offering of your first grain. You shall put oil on it and place frankincense on it, a meal offering. The Kohen shall cause its memorial portion to go up in smoke from its flour and its oil, as well as its frankincense, a fire offering to Hashem. I'd never caught that before, that there was the covenant. And it's described here in the stones as the covenant of salt. This is commentary on that. During the second day of creation, God created a division between the heavenly waters above the firmament and the earthly waters below. Genesis 1:7. The Midrash records that the earthly waters protested that they, too, wished to be close to God. To comfort them, God made a covenant that the water would have a share in the temple service, for salt, which comes from the sea, would be placed on sacrificial parts that go on the altar, and fresh water would be poured on the altar every Sukkos. If the salt was to assuage the wounded feelings of the lower waters, as it were, I think that's the word. A sewage. I'm not familiar with the word. Then why wasn't water poured on the altar after every offering? The answer may be found in how salt is taken from the sea. The water is boiled off or allowed to evaporate, leaving the salt behind. Thus, even the lower water rises to heaven in the form of water vapor. The only component of the water is that is commended to remain in the lower world is its salt. And in this verse, God declared that, too, is needed for his service. This is a lesson to all people in their everyday lives. A Jew can and should find spirituality not only in obviously holy and heavenly pursuits, but even in his seemingly mundane activities. That's from Rabbi Yaakov Kaminsky. And I thought that was just kind of neat. An example of how you can find far more out of a verse in Torah than what might simply be written there at first glance. But there is a covenant of salt, and I just found that fascinating.
I did as well. Read that explanation. I find it still fascinating.
Well, Pat, sir, how you been? Can you talk?
Baruch Hashem, quite well actually. Busy, but well.
Good.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Glad to have you.
Hi, Pat. Sorry, I had my mic muted. I was just talking away.
Hi. Long time no see, or speak, I guess.
Glad to see you back. I was saying that the covenant of salt is mentioned in Numbers chapter 18, verse 19.
What's it say?
You can. It says, "And the flesh of them that shall be yours as the weave." I'm sorry. I'm going to have to do this in the King James English. "And the flesh of them shall be thine as the wave breast, and as the right thigh it shall be thine." Verse 19. "All the heave offerings of the holy things which the children of Israel offer unto the Lord I have given thee, and thy sons and thy daughters with thee, as a due forever. It is an everlasting covenant of salt before the Lord unto you and your seed with you."
Now that's very interesting. I mean, it's very special. There's something very special about salt.
It says in the footnote here, the covenant of salt, i.e. a permanent covenant, as salt preserves food from putrefaction, it became the emblem of permanence.
What something interesting that might get lost is that practically speaking, when it comes to kosher meat after slaughter, well, after the slaughter process, I should say after the butchering process. That'd be a better way of saying it. After the butchering process, the first step you take in preserving the meat to maintain its kosher status is that you salt it to remove the blood. So the aspect of salt has to do with I don't know, like I'm just going off the top of my head here, but you might want to think about it's the first step between slaughter to table that's taken. Like it's the first step in the butchering process, I guess you could say, besides like cutting up the actual meat. But you salt it first to help exude some of the blood that's still within the meat. And then the other aspects of koshering meat, depending on how you serve it, either boil it or grill it. But the first take is salting it, and then obviously you wash it after. But there's
Yeah, there's a certain process.
Yeah, well, it's not just the process, but like in the initial step is to salt it, and the concept of salting it is specifically to have the blood kind of rise out of the flesh, and
Right.
the salt gathers it up. So there's definitely symbolism when it applies to at least the temple surface. If you could see the practical effect in the koshering process, you might be able to see more of a symbolic or deeper aspect when it comes to the actual surface. Like, what is the salting then? If we see the practical aspect of the salting it's the first step of removing blood, but it's also the first step in or I guess you could say it's the first step after slaughter that makes the meat kosher, and that's something that's lost on people. A lot of people, at least a lot of secular Jews and a lot of secular non-Jews, secular being like outside the Torah world, that when they think of kosher meat, just an animal that's not a pig, and then a blessing by a rabbi was done over it. But like kosher meat's a lot more technical and a lot more deeper than that. It's not just the aspect of killing the meat, but it's also preparing the meat. And the first step in the preparation is the salt. So like on a deeper level, it's you start the process, but the first step in getting to the next step is the salting, and the salting is what takes the blood out of it. So there's an aspect about the concept of salt being an initial step, but also like a crucial step that like raises blood out. So like I'm just kind of like going off the top of my head, but I'm sure we could find something nice and deep in there about the concept of removing, like bringing something out as the first step of removing it. And the first thing I could kind of think of is kind of Alcoholic Anonymous, kind of like 12-step program. And the first step is like acknowledging that you have an issue. So like if you will, like the first step after for making meat kosher is like you salt it, so you bring out the blood, acknowledging that even after you drain it, there's still blood in there, so acknowledging that there is something.
Right. It helps us to remember.
Yeah.
It helps us to remember that the life is in the blood, and we need to I don't know, in the footnote here in Leviticus it says salt prevents putrefaction. While leaven and honey produce it, salt is a preservative and typifies that which is abiding, like an everlasting covenant, which it talks about in Numbers. Among most ancient people, it was a sign of friendship to eat salt together. And so there's several different things that kind of it brings to your mind. First of all is don't eat blood. God said don't eat blood, so we try to get the blood out. But God tells us how to get the blood out, and it's through the act of drawing out. There's so many symbolisms there.
I think it's interesting that actually one of the symbols you brought up was like on the negative side, like the leavening, because obviously Pesach's coming up, and a lot of symbolism that's been traditionally used is that when a Israelite removes leaven from their home, like obviously it's drawing back to the narrative to relive it, but like the deeper concept that's usually parallel is that leaven is the ego. It's the necessary evil that has to be removed. Symbolically speaking, like how I guess even in English it translates pretty well because we have the phrase, somebody puffs themselves up. They kind of make themselves look bigger. It relates to the concept of leaven being like, the puffing up of ego, if you will.
Right. But
Yeah.
it mentions specifically from verse 12, where it talks, chapter 2, verse 12, where it mentions, as an offering of the first fruits, you may bring them to the Lord, but they shall not come up for a sweet savor on the altar. And in the footnote it says, leaven and honey might be presented at the sanctuary, though not on the altar as a sacrifice, as were ordinary first fruits. And in another place I saw where, here it is, it says the the reason for that, symbolically, it says leaven and honey, the prohibition extended only to their being burnt upon the altar. Leaven was regarded as a symbol of fermentation and corruption, and man's tendency to sin was later viewed as a process of moral fermentation. Honey was deemed in heathen cults as a favored food of the gods, and its prohibition was intended to free the mind of the Israelite from any degrading notion that sacrifices might be the food of God. So it's making that separation between pagan and,
And salt was brought up in the meal offering,
right.
which would perfect. I mean, that's absolute perfect.
Now, wouldn't that be why modern and correct me if I don't know. I'm just asking here. Just come to my mind. Whenever you break bread, and on Shabbat when they bless the challah, and then they take a piece of challah, they dip it in salt, and then they eat it. Is that why it is symbolically representing the sacrificial? Anybody know?
I do not.
I could help shed some light on that. Try it, but I'll give maybe if I may give a little bit a deeper aspect of it. So the initial aspect is obviously the Shabbat meal has to be defined as a meal. So the first part of the meal, at least part of the actual sit down meal is the bread, and what Jewish law necessitates is that on the Shabbat, for all the meals, but let's just say the first meal is the easiest, you make the blessing of the bread, but before you can make it, you either have to have salt or a salad on the table. And a salad means a dip, not like a salad in the Western sense, like a Caesar salad or an Israeli salad, but like something like a hummus or salsa, like a dip, because it's to symbolize an actual meal. Whereas like a proper meal is we consider bread not to be a meal, so because it's like a base food,
Right.
To substitute the meal. So you put salt or a salad on the table because you have it with the bread. So that's the blessing you're making of the meal.
Cool.
But what's the deeper aspect is so we can make that make sense with salads with dips and stuff, because you could have especially if you're poor from a different culture, you understand you could have bread with a bunch of different stuff, and that makes a meal, that if you don't have anything else. But where salt comes in and why it's such a beautiful ancient tradition is salt's considered to be the lowest aspect. So if you had bread and you had salt, a lot of people would enjoy that, because bread, traditionally speaking, doesn't have much flavor. It doesn't have the sugar we would add or the eggs or something. It'd be a lot more denser, so you'd add the salt to give a little bit of flavor. That would make it a kind of a meal, something you'd enjoy. But what it comes down to is the aspect of, since in a deeper level that's been really honed in a very beautiful way, is that it's a saying. I think it comes from the Jerusalem Talmud, but I could be wrong, so don't quote me on that. But it's definitely either in the Jerusalem Talmud, maybe in the Mishnah. But it's the idea that since the destruction of the temple, one's table becomes the altar, right? So that goes back to what you're saying, and
Right.
you have the salt symbolically there, because when you make the blessing, it goes back to the prophet saying that the prayers or the words will become a substitute for sacrifices, and obviously the cycles of Jewish life. Not Jewish life, but I mean the cycles on the daily aspect is surrounded around the concept of giving sacrifices, even the diaspora. So we pray at certain times because that's the time when the sacrifice would have gone on and stuff. So like when it comes to the actual meal, it's the meal is kind of dictated at a certain time as well. When you get back after sunrise, after sunset, sorry, and then it's dark out. So then you have the meal, and it's supposed to symbolize, because like I said, there's a quote that says that back the temple used to, or the altar used to atone for sin, and now the one's table will. And there's a whole deep discussion, like obviously for like thousands of years, it's been deep discussion on this. But one of the aspects is the idea, because when you're at a table, you'll surround yourself with good people and you'll speak Torah, right? Because like those are the people you'll be around, those like the highest aspects. And so there's all these symbolic aspects on the table, like you have the wine, you have the bread, you have the salt, you have some meat. And so the whole concept of the meal has become symbolic of the actual altar itself. And I think that's what, at least that's what Pam kind of brought up that reminded me of it. There's like symbolic aspects to the meal that people have linked to the temple service, because at the essence of the meal is not just eating and stuff, but it's really to have a conversation. And then in Pirkei Avot, especially, it says that when people are gathered at a table, the greatest thing is for them to speak Torah. So it becomes like a mini altar, and the dining room itself becomes like a mini temple. There's all this symbolic aspects to these just very base things. So like Pam hit the nail on the head. That's exactly what it is. It's like the idea why salt comes in a more esoteric way is that it's to be reminiscent of the salt that was used in the altar as the table becomes the altar.
Right.
The table becomes the servants of God, and that really like draws to finish my rant. But for me, that really is what draws Judaism into the practical real world. Is that even something like a meal that you have is to be seen as like the most highest elevated service of God. Feeding yourself and having a conversation with somebody you're very close to is supposed to be a religious act. Like something so basic and human as eating and communicating is supposed to be reminiscent of the actual temple sacrifice in Jerusalem itself. Very, very interesting symbolism. Beautiful.
Yeah, that's what came into my mind. Was I've heard that explained before, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful way to keep the temple and the sacrificial things going in your consciousness.
You're creating in your dining room a Sinai event.
Basically, you're continuing to remember.
What's all for? What's the altar and what's the tabernacle? The Mishkan is to remind us of Sinai, so we don't forget.
Yep.
And so the whole Shabbat experience even goes back to, which obviously came before in creation. Obviously was long before, but it all comes. I've been having a Sinai year, I think, and it's all coming.
We all are.
It comes back to Sinai. So, and wow, Pat, thank you. That's awesome. I'm trying to implement a rhythm first. I'm trying to get the rhythm. First you have to have a steady drummer before you can dance, right? And I got two little ones now. I don't know if you knew that I had another little girl since last we talked anyway. So I'm trying to implement every Saturday. It's family night, and I light some candles and say a little prayer, and I'm getting in this rhythm of things. And just to know what it is I'm getting myself into just by remembering the day. I'm not trying to keep anything. We don't do, we don't do it like the Jews do. We're not here, but it's just something to remember what this means. And
you honor the day.
And one day it's going to be, the world's going to do it, isn't it?
Yep.
After Moshiach, once we get things settled.
Yep.
That'll be a weekly Sinai event. Wow, wow.
Yep. So what we're doing now is learning about it, practicing it on a certain level just so we become aware. We're honoring the day.
Yes.
And that I like to call it honoring the seventh day. We're honoring Shabbat. Now, if you say celebrate Shabbat, people freak out.
Well.
And to us, we're celebrating the fact that the seventh day was created specifically, but they misunderstand what we say, so I just turned it into, well, we honor that day.
Yeah.
It's just so much easier.
We remember here.
Yeah.
at the house. It's a celebration for me because I'm off work, and the fact that I've started lighting candles again. I don't know if you knew this, Pat, but a long time ago, 15, almost 20 years ago, gosh, almost 20 years ago now, when I first started learning of Judaism and one God, and the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, I would, on Friday night, I'd get a bunch of tea lights, and I'd always light them around the house. I mean, we were drinking beer and listening to rock and roll music, but it created an atmosphere, and everybody knew why I was doing it and loved it. And I had some of the craziest, goyim you'll ever meet coming over saying Happy Sabbath. No kidding. And when I realized I could be, stepping on or taking, rubbing God's rhubarb, if pardon the expression, I backed off of that. But I've really, the more I remember that day, my whole week is for that day. It's the happiest time, and not to know what the priests are doing or how it affects the nation of priests and how that's looked at. That's encouraging. I think. I hope that's okay. I hope I'm not.
There's a parable from a Gaon and the Gaonim. So like a lot of people know the Vilna Gaon, right? Everybody's heard the Vilna Gaon. Like an actual Gaon, like a Gaon now means a genius. So that's why a lot of people, like even today, you'll have like a lot of rabbis with the title, like people will call them Gaon.
Yeah.
Gaon for people who are curious, or maybe even Geon depending. But back in the day, like it was what it really means essentially in the Jewish context is that it's a period of time. So like we mark our the segments of Jewish history in epochs, and one of the epochs was the time of the Gaonim. So it was the time when the people we respectfully and honorably call the Gaons lived. And why they're important, at least to me, in my tradition, I'm very biased because I put a lot of focus on them. But they're very important because they were the first generation, not even the first, but they lived during the generation, and they extend as being the first generation after the sealing of the Babylonian Talmud.
Oh.
So the Gaons are, for me at least, and I'm biased, but like the Gaons are the first generation of like what we would call Judaism. Today, it was the first generation after the final acknowledging that nothing really new is going to come. We have to wait. So like it happened initially back in maybe 400 or 500 years before that, when they're like, okay, no more prophets are coming. Then later on, after the sealing of Babylonian Talmud, they're like, okay, no more legislation from the courts are coming. So the Gaonim were the first generation to tackle this problem of what does it mean to practice quote-unquote Judaism, i.e. Torah and the diaspora without a centralized authority. Because of different, at that point it was just different communities going for responses. And then the Gaonim, that generation, they were the first, mainly obviously because they're coming from a previous generation, but they were rooted essentially in modern day Iraq and Israel, Palestine area, and so that was essentially it. Because for a long time, like from before the time of Ezra, those were the two established communities, those in Babylon and those in the land of Israel. Obviously, you had communities in Yemen and Ethiopia and Tunisia during the Second Temple period, but those were the main communities, and that's where everybody flocked to during the Roman occupation. They flocked most flocked to Babylon because there's already a community there since forever.
Okay, let me ask you. Let me confirm.
Sure.
When the Second Temple came down, those who were able to clarify keeping the Torah that everybody was still under, how are we going to do this? This was the generation that pretty much solidified what we know of today as Judaism. Is that what I'm getting? No.
You're 3 generations off. So like when the temple came down, so the process started before the temple came down, but the temple came down in the year 70.
Did this all start even before the Second Temple was built? Was this outside of?
So that's why it's difficult, because so we have, obviously, with the Babylonian exile, we have a community there, and there's a lot of scholars, and this is actually for a lot of people, this is a very good defense against the concept of quote unquote rabbinical Judaism. You know, people like that term.
Right.
You know, I hate it because it's very offensive for various reasons. But the concept of rabbinical Judaism, a lot of people say, is essentially that, and you'll get this from Samaritans, but more so now with you know, atheists or Christians. But the original concept was there's this foreign belief system that was not biblically based, that started during the Second Temple period. But the thing is that making a very big assumption that during the Second Temple period, like from the time of Ezra, the prophet Malachi, Zechariah, Daniel, Mordecai, from the story of Esther, from their point in time up until the Roman occupation, is that the majority of the Jewish world lived in the land of Israel, but they didn't.
Right? Only like a third, was it, came back?
Right. And that's a very crucial point that a lot of people should remember, because it's a very good defense. Because essentially what it's saying is that, well, if this quote-unquote rabbinical new system arose in the land of Israel, it shouldn't have already been represented in pre-Roman occupation lands, like in Babylon, like in Egypt, and like in Tunisia, like in Yemen. So Jews, since the dispersion of the Assyrians and Babylonians, and then going into the Persian period, we were living outside the land. We had synagogues, and we had communication, and even when Jews returned to land, it was still a minority, even though the authority was there, right? The authority of Ezra and the prophets and all that stuff. That continued way into for hundreds of years. But that's still not to say that, you know, there's all these established communities throughout the known world at that time. So it's a very beautiful it's a very beautiful concept. But why it's so important is that to say that there was this kind of, you know, new system of rabbinical Judaism, and somehow it was accepted in all these diasporic communities that had no contact with each other outside of communing with Israel, is pretty odd. You'd think you'd have some Samaritans somewhere else, or some Sadducees in Babylonia, or what have you. But what I was trying to go with this was the idea with the concept of the Gaonim. We're talking about maybe at the earliest, like 300 years after the destruction of the Second Temple, is when this generation came about. And they're the first generation after this. Well, technically the second generation, but really we would say the first generation after the sealing of the Babylonian Talmud. But where I was trying to go with this was, oh no, I think I lost my train of thought.
It's not like I haven't learned anything.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to go off a tangent, but I had an actual point. And I wish I could remember exactly. Maybe I'll have to go back and remember. But at least speaking, when it comes to
you were saying that it was very important about you're a little biased toward this particular generation.
Yeah, I'm biased to this particular generation because for me, like my chain of tradition, as it becomes like individual from other people's chain of tradition.
And what's your mission for all the fine folks out there in YouTube land? So
I'm, technically speaking, I belong to the a group of Judaism called Dor Daim, and it means a generation of knowledge. It's a kind of like a derogative term, but we've embraced it. And my chain actually, as being Dor Daim, started in the 1800s, but it's following a chain of tradition that goes from, like, I can trace my chain of tradition back to Moses, but I go specifically through, like, the main figureheads would be Rabbi Yehia Gaffeh, who started the Dor Daim movement in the 1800s, but his chain of tradition goes back to the Rambam, and his chain of tradition goes back to the Rif, who lived 2 generations before him. And the Rif goes back to the time of the Gaonim, and then once you get to the Gaonim, I specifically go to Rav Sadia Gaon, who's a very famous Gaon, and then once you get to the Gaonim, then you go right back to the Talmudic period. And then once you go to the Talmudic period, it's pretty easy to go back to the Mishnaic period, the period of Brightot. Then you get to the period of the Great Court of Ezra, and then obviously then you get to the prophets, and then you go back to Moses. So like as far as my chain tradition it goes as it starts to deviate from a lot of people, and this is true for actually most groups of Jews. It's just during that generation of the Gaonim, a lot of people have their own Gaon that they trace their roots back to, because the Gaonim was the first generation after sealing the Babylonian Talmud and after the decentralization. Because even though the temple was destroyed in the year 70, we still had scholars and court systems that were all in line with each other, and the entirety of the Jewish world interacted with. So even though there was no temple, the system wasn't decentralized yet. But they saw it coming, and that's why they codified the Bible, the Tanakh, and that's also why they codified the Mishnah, because they saw a period of, well, the temple's gone, and now we still have the community structure, even though the temple's gone, but that will erode eventually because it was dependent on, one centralized area of agreement. And so that's exactly what happened. So like first they made the Bible, and then they made the Mishnah, and then they made the Jerusalem Talmud, and then they made the Babylonian Talmud, and at the period of the Babylonian Talmud, that's when Jews were so far flung that it was impractical. So you had people trained in the academies of Babylonia, which were in 2 cities, the city of Sura and the city of Pampatita, and there's the academies in Israel, which were mainly in modern-day city of Tiberias, Sfat, and probably Jerusalem, debatable. But so those were the academies, and they weren't so far from each other. They were in community with each other during the time of the prophets. That was obviously a thing because so many Jews stayed in Babylonia. They didn't return with the Exodus led by Cyrus. But why it's important, like I'm saying, why I go back to the periods of Gaons and why they're so important to me, is because there's this. I think it went back to what you're saying about making the seventh day important to you and going back to that. And it's for me, it's because one of the Gaonim of that generation made a important allusion, is that so right now being, in his opinion, like the period of diaspora for Jews, so like from the year probably from like the Roman occupation, so like probably from the year 100 BCE more or less till today, the year 2000 CE, we've been in diaspora, and that was really ringing true to the words of the prophets. And one of the words of the prophets, that the essential holiday that will link Jews and non-Jews together, Israelites and Noahides, is the holiday of Sukkot. Now, that's made famous in the book of Zechariah. I think it's the 14th chapter or so, and that's considered to be like the big kind of the big holiday.
Look out, the Noahides are coming, huh?
Right, exactly. That's going to be the pilgrimage festival for everyone. But he said on like a much deeper note is that it's really going to be the Shabbat, because what the Shabbat will manifest is that the concept of non-Jews, and this is obviously his opinion and hypothetical, but the concept of non-Jews observing Sukkot and not Rosh Hashanah is interesting, because Rosh Hashanah is, it's what it really symbolizes is the creating of Adam, which classically speaking would be the creation of the first man. Well, we would say the first prophet, but would it be the first monotheistic man, first person to really understand God? God would want to interact with humanity. So you would understand that, and like there's a lot of like beautiful reasons why Noahide should observe that with such fervorousness, because not only is the creation of all of humanity as we know it, but it's also a time of judgment. But somehow the prophets focus on saying that, no, it's going to be Sukkot, which is very hard. Maybe not as hard as Pesach to explain, but it's still just as hard to explain why that would be a universal holiday. But what the Gaonim saying is, like, that was just like how Sukkot represents the time of wandering in the wilderness, the time of darkness, and a time of necessity of community. So that's what it means, right? It means, like, just like in those times, you needed your neighbor. You were wandering aimlessly. You didn't know you were going necessarily, and you need a community to survive. So symbolically, in this time of period, it's up until the construction of the Second Temple period, or the Third Temple, sorry. Jews and non-Jews will realize that they need each other more so. In my opinion, that Jews will understand they really need non-Jews, and in the building of that really true Torah community globally. But what it comes down to saying, like, well, after that period, they're saying that it's really going to be the Shabbat, because the Shabbat's going to bring it all into focus. So the focus of Sukkot is the revelation of Torah, because Sukkot is hardwired with the creation of the Jewish people. So we have the Passover event laying the frameworks for the giving of Torah, but Sukkot symbolizes,
what you've had.
Yeah, what a majority of the Torah places its focus on, from Exodus to Deuteronomy. That's the majority of the Torah portion is about the wandering through the wilderness. So that's also symbolic, because it's going to need this time to come to fruition. But the pinnacle of the Torah really comes down to the belief and worship of the one true God. And so that's what the Gaon was trying to say, is that, well, once we get to the Messianic period, then the most important idea will be the Shabbat, because that's the fundamental acknowledgement that there is a creator in the universe. But the first way you have to get there is through the Torah. So symbolically, the revelation and the explanation of the beauty of the Torah comes through the holiday of Sukkot. So that's why it becomes, first you have, right now in our period of time, we have the responsibility of Israel to teach the rest of the world. And then once that responsibility has been really manifest, then we'll be in the Messianic era, and then Jews and non-Jews will be celebrating the concept of Torah, which would be Sukkot, the revelation of Torah, in its fullest aspect. And eventually, once we have that period of time, once we're in the aspect of the true Messianic era, once everything's peachy and clean, then we're in the aspect of Shabbat. And that also goes back to the idea of, like, we're living, what day symbolically are we living in? The seventh day, the eighth day, the sixth day. Like, how do you balance that? So there's really this beautiful thing that I really, me personally, I really find so enjoyable about the concept of the deeper meaning of Shabbat. It's not just a time for Jews to rest as it is now, but possibly in the future it becomes a much brighter aspect of the idea of where the whole entire world is acknowledging the one true God. And that's what the concept of Shabbat is supposed to be. It's supposed to be like a time, obviously on a weekly basis, where you acknowledge that there's a creator, there's a sustainer of the universe, and he's over all of it. And God willing, in the future event and period of time, then it'll be the whole world acknowledging that period. But you have to get there step by step.
When you mentioned community in wandering in the wilderness, and yet it being a time when everybody shares on Sukkot, when we share in Torah, Jew and non-Jew alike, it would be interesting that would happen in the wilderness, because that's where you'd meet a lot of us. I mean, if you went straight into the land and took it, it would have been, you wouldn't have wandered. There would have been no one to share. There would have been no one knocking on it, because everybody would be in their own Sukkot. I don't know. That was going through my head. I want to move us along. I want to advance us a bit. I did want to talk about more of the sins in the first Parsha, but I really think if you want to know a good reason, one of the reasons why we don't succumb to the big Western religion, and why we don't accept the claim, it's pretty much going to be in the first 4 or 5 chapters of Leviticus, because God is very specific, God is very concise, He doesn't mess around. And to deviate from that in any way is bringing something foreign into it, which you're not supposed to do. So I did want to get that clear. I'm going to move on to it. We'll get to the Haftorah later if we can, which is I believe is it Zach? No, okay, we'll get to that in a bit. What is a priest?
Sorry, before you go on, can I just interject? Because I'm about to head out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was obviously great to be back and short discussion. Next week, I'm hosting a hangout, and I hope everybody can join. It should kind of start around the time when yours ends, hopefully. So if you can make it over as an after party from this hangout, it'd be great. I'd love to have everybody going on. It's a post-Purim hangout, and we'll talk about the story of Purim and obviously, hopefully, how to be a better person. So I hope everybody can join me this around probably 10:30 or 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursday. So
got an invite to that. Okay.
Yeah, I hope to see everybody there.
Thank you very much, Yitzhak.
If I'm home early enough, I'll try to be in this hangout beforehand. Cool. All the best.
You too, sir. Thanks.
Thanks.
What is a priest? We've got the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. We have the priests in the temple. We have the Levites themselves. We have Israel as a nation. We have the Gerim as the fourth house. For a ger, for a Noahide who's attached himself, not just he's attached himself to the law, but literally to the nation of Israel. I mean, our place is with the Levites in a city. If we're not employed, we would live in one of the cities, one of the refuge cities where the Levites go. So our place is with the priests. Would a ger be an acolyte to a priest? I know that they said the one who keeps the 7 laws is to be treated as if he's a high priest, but I'll tell you this, I can guarantee you 10 years ago I had no clue what it meant to be a priest and half the knowledge to know what it meant to be a Noahide.
Ross?
I don't know.
Yes, Woody.
Connect
What's up,
the
Ben?
dot.
Do you think a ger would be priestly, or would he be something different entirely? Would the priesthood apply to us in any way, shape, or form? We would be in a nation of priests. We would be amongst a nation of priests.
Isn't it in Ezekiel where it talks about him selecting people from the ger to work in the temple? Ross, I know you can connect some dots for him, and I can't find my sources right now, so
Okay.
run with it.
Paint a loose picture. Yes, you have 48 cities. Yes, there are Levites living in these 48 cities. Levites are priests. If a ger, a widow, and an orphan are associated with these priests, and they receive the 3rd year tithe just like the Levites or the Levitical priests, then they're in the same community as the priest. And what would a priest be doing? He's not working for him because he didn't inherit them. Neither did the widow, neither did the ger.
It's like training.
Yes, sir. You're studying Torah.
For
That's
everybody.
Huh?
The widow would work with the priests. The orphans would work in schools with the priests. It would all be it would almost be people who have accidentally killed and have to deal with that. So it's
a community.
The community that's working in the service of God, supported by God, and studying
Torah. Because the priests have to know the law. The priests have to study Torah. And who's there with the priests? So the ger that studies Torah is like What?
A high priest.
High priest.
But it's
All right.
your perspective. That means something completely different, Ross.
How do you mean?
Well, beforehand, the first, 15, 20 years, whatever, it was flattering. I don't mean that in a bad way. You don't flatter, I know. It was flattering. It also said that when a non-Jew's around, they got to straighten up, so they don't show or give the impression that this is the proper way a Jew should act if they're not acting the way a Jew would be expected maybe to act. You know what I'm saying? I never really, and that's what it's always been. And it was so important, and they always quote it. You go to every Noahide site that was out there at the time. There's been a few changes, Baruch Hashem. But it was flattery. I'm not a priest. What?
Actually, that's a hint at what you're going to be called to do or help. I mean, we become like assistants, if you will.
When you take off the rainbow specs and put your gear goggles on,
Hello.
it becomes practical. It becomes
Growing up.
living thing. It's real.
Yep. We become helpers.
Serving the world.
Serving the world. Serving God in service of Hashem. We become helpers. Kind of like a marriage. When you marry a wife, you're equal, but you have different chores, so if you will. But she's your helper.
So you,
Sometimes she challenges you, and sometimes she doesn't. It's like a marriage relationship.
kind of like a Nilva.
Like a Nilva. I get Nilva. I need a hat.
Levi, Nilva, attachment.
Joining.
This is where the wow.
Like I tell Larry all the time, you're stuck.
Yep. So it's a marriage to the priests is what this is in this community, this society.
Well, if you think about it, think a little deeper. We can't own land. Makes it hard for us to be farmers on our own. Makes it difficult for us to own our own business. Not saying that we couldn't, maybe. I'm not sure how that would work. But if we draw our sustenance from Hashem along with the Levites, it makes sense. We're going to be helping the Levites in whatever capacity they're doing their work. If we're attaching ourselves to Israel, it makes sense that we would be serving Israel alongside of Israel. We don't become Israel's servants, we become their co-workers. Right?
Right.
That's the difference between the slave and servant. If you, as a care, put yourself in the position of servant, I'll tune your lyre, I'll clean your harp or tambourines or whatever, because the Levites were the singers and the musicians in the temple. I'll carry your instrument for you. Then there were a certain kind of gerim, and you can bounce this off of cats. There were certain gerim who only worked, I think. Let's just put it this way. They were constantly at the temple, at the entrance to the temple. And when a minion showed up, whether it was Levites or others, they would be an hour there before the minion showed up and have everything prepared for the minion. They would come in, do their hour's worth of mincha in the morning, whatever, and then they would stay an hour after to pick up. Then when they came for the noontime prayers, the hour of preparation, they were there for the hour of and the hour after. So they were constantly there. They were assistants, and they were prepping and cleaning up for each one of the prayer sessions. Check with Ref Cats on that. He'll clarify it even more. But they only essentially worked 3 hours a day, and their work was highly blessed.
If I remember correctly, and I don't have the Tanakh in front of me, it's over at Larry's side of the word. Isn't it in Ezekiel where it talks about, thank you, dear. Isn't it in Ezekiel where it talks about the third temple, and that after the third temple is built, that there are some taken from the nations to work at the temple?
Sure, and that could be in the capacity of sharpening knives.
No, whatever it is, you're doing the work.
Sure, tuning the
If I
hearts.
had to push peas across the floor with my nose, I would thank God I could. Larry said he would sell pictures. But the point is they're chosen to work at the temple. They're not separated. They're not pushed away. They're not isolated from. They actually work at. That was a real eye-opening thing for me when I came across it.
And why would that be? It's because they are living and studying and working with the Levites. They know exactly what to do, when to do it, and how to do it.
Okay. Well, then let's get real generic here and look at a priest. If we were Gerim, or let's just say that we might not necessarily be in the land, but of course there's going to be Torah-based courts all over. It's, Zion comes from, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Who's a priest? What would be, if you biblically, when you say they serve the people, I mean, I can look at a generic priest from all over the world. You look at some of the pagan priests of the British Isles were kind of like the medicine men of the Native Americans. They shaman, if you will, and then you have priests like you would have over in the Far East, which were kind of like what we think of monks today, where they take care of the poor in their community, and
They're like the neighborhood synagogues.
yeah, but is this the same basic function, or is there something greater to it, would you say, when it comes to a priest biblically compared to what we would see in the world? Where's the line drawn? Where do we draw that line? Besides, obviously, that they, love Hashem, believe in Hashem only. Functionally, what would be the difference? What would we be learning? What would if we were traveling with Levites? What would we be doing alongside them? What do they do? If
Whatever they need done.
at the temple, they would obviously service offerings and the temple itself, and what is it? I hope I'm not muddying the waters, as they say. I'm trying to find where if it's just the fact that they believe in God alone is enough to separate what we would think priests in other areas of the world, juxtapose what we will see in the Messianic era, or what is a priest in the Bible now.
Like I like to say, sometimes you can get a better picture of something if you're painting in the negative. When you say priest, obviously you know about a Catholic priest. Go in, you confess, he tells you to do X, Y, and Z, and your sins are forgiven, absolved, or whatever. Well, we know that that's not the case with Hashem. You bring your offering, you come to the temple, you atone for the sins through this offering. So a priest, obviously, here, does not forgive your sins or atone for your sins or make up for your sins. You see how I'm painting in the negative. Hello?
He's thinking.
No, I'm speaking while my mic is muted.
Ah,
Yes, absolutely. Perfect. And I was thinking there are no guarantees with an offering either. I never thought of that either. Whereas we have to, if there's an eclipse, we have to shed blood, or it won't pass. You know what I'm saying? There's no guarantees that anything's forgiven. You can offer, you can do the best you can. I'm sure God will take it into account, but there are no guarantees. We have to do this. We have to sacrifice a blonde virgin, or we won't get spring. You know. So as long as we do it every year, we're going to have it. How do we know it works? Because we've been doing it every year, and we have spring.
Well, by the same token, too, if it says that if you sin unintentionally and you bring a particular type of offering and make this offering for this unintentional sin, you are making atonement for that sin. Well, on the one hand, an unintentional sin would have to be committed by someone who is a student learning. He's trying to learn how to do the right thing the right way at the right time. Perhaps he forgot a little detail. It was unintentional. He hadn't been raised from birth to do a certain thing, but he's trying to learn how to change or alter his ways. He forgets, it's unintentional. He realizes it, he makes an atonement. Who would fit into that category? A Nilva, a Ger, perhaps?
a Nilviger.
A Nilva or a Ger, somebody that's coming in from the outside, trying to learn, adapt, change, be a part of. And if he's acting independently, trying to do whatever he's supposed to do, Shabbos or some other thing, and he accidentally forgets a detail, commits an error, unintentionally, it slipped his mind. Okay, if you're raised from birth, you begin to do things from habit, continuously. You know exactly when that you have to jump up and go pray, what prayers to say, at what time, and so on and so forth. You know the details. You're taught it from an early childhood. But if you're coming in from the outside, you're probably going to sit there and literally read from a script, if you know what I mean.
Exactly. And why is that?
Why are you reading from a script?
No. Why are we prevented from knowing what the ger is to do? Because I mean, the Jewish people study it. They look into it. They even to the point of setting up a third temple. What's his name? Rabbi. The third temple.
Rabbi Korfin, the third temple, the Messianic temple.
Who's the rabbi that's doing the third temple thing right now?
Oh,
Rabbi Chaim Corfine is no.
The rabbi that's the third temple, the guy that we talked to.
not Rabbi Schwartz, no.
No,
Brodkin.
he's going around to the Christian churches.
Oh, Richmond.
Yeah, Richmond.
Okay.
Careful naming names.
I was trying to.
Go ahead.
All right.
They're setting up a quote unquote a display thing of the third temple, and they're practicing this.
Oh, he's talking about in Israel where they're the Kohanim are actually practicing for actual things they will be doing when the temple is built.
Properly lighting a menorah.
Yeah,
But they're actually practicing the ceremonial things, and
right.
they're wearing the clothes and going through the processes. You know, they're pretending
Oh,
they're playing house, so to speak.
they're preparing.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they disallow the ger.
At this point, yes, that's true.
But what he's saying is
If they can practice what they need to be doing, why is the
why
ger
can't we?
precluded from doing what he needs to be doing?
They're not recognized yet, and they're practicing, but they won't let us practice, even though, you know.
They won't even let us in the back door.
Okay, let's say it this way.
Yeah, I think they're getting it now.
Let's put it this way. If they're rehearsing, it must be because they're learning how to do what they need to do. They're learning.
Exactly.
So how are they going to teach somebody else if they're not sure yet to do what they're supposed to do in the first place?
True.
What was wasn't there a thing, something along the lines of, if you need to ask, the answer's no?
Right.
Well, that's just it. How are you going to learn how to do it properly?
Larry's saying, why do they tell us we can't behave as ger, even though we understand the status of a ger doesn't exist today?
Except for that one guy.
Yeah.
That one guy got Gare all the way. Isn't that nice?
Yeah, but that was because somebody had an ulterior motive. Sorry. I have issues with that one. I have to shut my mouth.
At least the door got cracked.
I'm going to say that right there. Apparently, there's still a war going on. People haven't gotten it. I'm so immersed, I don't even notice what's going on out there. But we have a Gare already. One of our kind is already recognized. The floodgates are already open. The crack in the dam's there. You know,
They're the ones that put it there.
it's
They cracked it.
it's coming, and it will be beautiful. I believe.
Well, what Larry's point is that
Yeah.
if they recognize their Cohens and they're practicing in anticipation of the third temple being rebuilt, why don't they allow us to say, hey, we recognize who we are, and we too are practicing in anticipation, so that when the time is right, we'll know what to do.
Well, look at it as a practice ruling.
There we go. That was Larry's point, though.
They're getting ready. No, go away. You bother me. No.
If they're practicing and they can read the scripture and they know that Ger are going to be there, why can't they at least?
Maybe they're afraid we're going to show up and try to help them practice.
What would be wrong with that?
Well, you confuse them. I don't know.
I don't know if I need their authority. Bless them.
Well, we have to practice as best we can because we're growing in knowledge. We're just learning. You know, there's so much more we don't know.
As long as it's their property, they don't have to let us in the back door. But by the same token, they ought to at least acknowledge that we do
exist. Yeah, and it's okay because the way I see it, we're studying, we're learning, we're growing in knowledge. God, hopefully, we're getting some wisdom along the way, and so when the third temple is built, the Jubilee is established, we're not going to be standing there going, duh. You know, we're going to have a heads up about where we fit, what we do, how we, you know, we can just step right into place almost.
Can I please kind of just turn your vision just a slight little bit?
You could turn it a lot.
Well, this might just be one of those, oh yeah, moments, right?
Okie dokie. I have my pencil.
Okay. Solomon, when he built his temple, in his prayer he said, that this would be a house of prayer for all nations,
Exactly.
meaning that all nations should come to it and pray.
Right.
The temple, the third temple, when it's built, as it is prophesied, it is said that all the people from the nations will come and bring contributions for the construction of the temple, the third temple, correct?
Right.
Just like the free will offerings of the people in the wilderness with Moses. Whatever man's heart is motivated, let him bring for the contribution of the building of the Mishkan. If you read the prophets, what it's saying is the people from the nations will contribute towards the building of this third temple, correct?
Right.
And it will become a house of prayer for all nations, correct?
Correct.
Why is it a house of prayer for all nations? Because all nations contributed to its construction.
Correct.
A house of prayer for all nations is a house of prayer built by all nations.
Correct.
Gare,
Duh.
who's going to willingly bring offerings for the construction of the temple?
I know a bunch that would help do the construction.
I'm saying, what would you call a person who jumps up and makes a free will offering, a
Have to
contribution?
be there. Yeah.
Thank you. And where do the Gerim come from? Every nation.
Every nation. Yep.
So don't despair.
Building
It's coming. They will eventually get Ger. And once they get Ger, the temple gets built.
Yep.
I wanted to bring up one thing on the live portion so we can get this out there. Again, we're going back to Torah portion. I don't mean to keep changing subject. There's one thing I wanted to bring up, and we kind of got sidetracked, which is really great. Path has a lot to offer, especially we don't get to hear from other parts of Israel sometimes. Is the peace offering. And I never really, I don't know if I just didn't read the commentary, if I was more caught up in countering what's an offering by other religions. I don't know where I was at, but it's so beautiful. And Jethro, Mr. Ger of Torah, the Ger, really in many ways, he first it was an elevation offering and then a peace offering. So we know what an elevation offering is. We covered that. If you're just tuning in, wait till we're uploaded and check it out at the beginning. But a peace offering, if his peace offering is a feast peace offering, this is still a soul. It's still referring to him if he brings. This is unlike an elevation offering. This is where you're called a soul. Peace offerings are brought voluntarily by a person or group of people who are moved to express their love of God, their gratitude for His goodness, and to enhance their closeness to Him. In the words of Seforno and Kavanos HaTorah, the peace offering is brought as a tribute to God, blessed be He, when the person moved to offer it recognizes ways of His goodness and His constant goodness to us. Various reasons are offered for the name of Shelamim, or peace offerings. According to Rashi from Sifra, the name is derived from Shalom, peace, and this is the good part, because the peace offering has the spiritual capacity of increasing peace in the world. It goes on to say, alternatively, since the peace offering has a portion for the altar, a portion for the Kohanim, and a portion for the owners, its name symbolizes the peace that results when the legitimate needs of all groups are satisfied. According to Korban Aharon, the peace expressed by the name is the harmony between the heavenly world of the spirit and the earthly world of materialism. One who brings a peace offering seeks to unite the two worlds. Ramban derives the word shalamim from wholeness in Hebrew. I'm not going to try right now. Because the person who brings this offering has not been motivated by a need to atone for sin, but by a sense of wholeness and free will desire for perfection. Amen.
So that takes you right back to Shem and Abraham. Shem called it shalom, peace. Abraham called it yira, awesome, or fear. And when we finally get that peace, that will be awesome. Jerusalem, Yerushalayim.
Ha! And another constellation is brought together by the mighty Bearden. The mighty bearded Bearden. Thursday night's Noahide Nexus. You won't get this anywhere else, folks, right here. I think that's a great place to leave it. What do you say?
That would be good, yes.
Food for thought.
Well, for all of you out there watching this on the mighty YouTube channel, the Idol Smasher, thank you so much. Check out other times, other classes, gatherings, I don't know, hangouts here on Google Plus at the Idol Smasher YouTube page. If you like what you see, join our page on Facebook and get in touch with me here on Google Plus, and I'll hook you up with, get you on the mailing list and let you know when we're going to be doing these. We'll be back next Thursday. On behalf of Pam, Ross, and Path and everybody, shalom.
Shalom.
Shalom.